For most of the ship's company, leave was the important feature of the period. But not everyone was lucky, as the Firemen's Union was still taking industrial action, and some of the ship's company were volunteered to go and perform firefighting duties throughout the country in the renovated Green Goddesses. By the third week of January 1978, the dispute was over and men began to return to the ship. By way of a change, a new ARK Royal was launched, not by the Navy but by British Rail. Under a revised policy, British Rail had decided to give locomotives names, and in the Western region, their Class 50 mainline diesel-electric locomotives were to be named after past and present warships. The first to be named was number 50035, and Captain Anson performed the unveiling ceremony at Plymouth Station on Tuesday the 17th of January, with the Royal Marine Band providing suitable music. To ensure that the ARK Royal lived up to its name, Captain Anson presented two ship's crests made in gunmetal to be mounted on either side of the locomotive. The weekend of the 21st of January, ARK Royal acted as a host ship to two visiting Dutch frigates. Unfortunately, because of bad weather and the state of the pitches, all outdoor sporting activities were cancelled, but our Dutch comrades were made most welcome and enjoyed their weekend. From the evening of the 26th of January, there would be no more Beano, as Commander MacLeod was quietly relieved by our new executive officer, Commander Wetherall. During the dockyard-assisted maintenance period, our harbour administrative inspection was carried out by C&C Fleet and FOCAS staff during the week starting the 13th of February. Needless to say, there was a continuous stream of individuals and groups visiting the ship. On the 15th of February, Professor Mason, the Chief Scientific Advisor to the Navy, came to see the old lady. The final weekend before our departure for another workup proved to be quite eventful. Heavy falls of snow and blizzards isolated parts of the southern counties and made travelling very difficult as roads and railways were blocked. Weymouth and Portland natives, as well as those from Dorset, were completely cut off for several days. But despite all the odds, Commander Wetherall managed to make his way from Portsmouth to Plymouth by a longer than usual route, which took him 10 hours. Except for a few people still snowbound in Dorset, most of us who had travelled during the previous weekend managed to reach the ship, and on the morning of sailing the BBC TV nationwide team was on board to follow up the Save the ARK Royal campaign, which was started by a 14-year-old schoolboy Richard Crease. The TV cameras followed him as he toured the ship, talking to members of the ship's company. By 16:30 we were on our way to sea again, and the first night was spent trying and testing systems in Lyme Bay. While we were off Portland on the 22nd, the men who had not reached Plymouth were helo-lifted back on board, and we also embarked 4 gannets, 7 phantoms, but the Buccaneers remained at a fog-bound Honington. That evening we passed through the busy Dover Straits into the North Sea, and during the passage northwards off the east coast of England, the Buccaneers left East Anglia on the 23rd and recovered safely on board. February the 27th saw the start of our sea inspection. FOCAS staff embarked and FOCAS himself arrived on Tuesday. The Director-General of the BBC, Mr. Ian Trethorn, came on board and was most impressed by our performance. Throughout the week, FOCAS and his staff inspected RFA's Olmeda and Resource and visited HMS Leander, all of which were in company with us. Generally, flying took place in the forenoons and evenings, leaving the afternoons free for seamanship and departmental evolutions, in preparation for Sea Inspection Day on Saturday the 4th of February. The drills began at 0600, and right from the start, departments were involved in numerous exercises and evolutions, ranging from baking a cake, fires, crashes on the flight deck, and going to the aid and salvaging of a stricken Spanish tanker, in the guise of RFA Olmeda. From a weather point of view, it was a lovely day for a cruise with blue skies and excellent visibility. In general, the inspection went well, and FOCAS congratulated us on our efforts. He commented on the happy family spirit on board and the pride in our ship which his staff had encountered, and said that we had done well and hoped to see the same spirit and pride when he next paid us a visit. FOCAS departed early on the 5th, and the fixed-wing squadrons, except for a few aircraft which were to remain on board for families' days, followed him during the forenoon. In the afternoon and the following forenoon, 824 Squadron did a magnificent job in disembarking the fixed-wing ground crews to Lucas, and by midday on the 6th, the task was complete as we headed south for the English Channel. On Wednesday the 8th, the Sea Kings disembarked Caldrose from Falmouth Bay, and the ship returned to Plymouth Sound and spent the night at Charlie Boy in preparation for the influx of our families and friends. Thursday the 9th of March, and the ship's final families' days had arrived. The guests began arriving soon after 6 a.m, and by 9 o'clock they had all had their breakfast, and the ship had slipped from the buoy with 1,500 extra people on board. Once in the English Channel, our guests were able to witness from 3-deck the launch and recovery of gannets, phantoms and buccaneers. Unfortunately, low cloud and fog, which had been expected, arrived during the afternoon and prevented the final flying display from taking place. But despite this disappointment, most people enjoyed their day touring the ship. Just being in ARK Royal was a memorable occasion in itself. As the ship approached Plymouth Sound, the weather improved a little and the decision to go up harbour was made. In deteriorating conditions, we berthed alongside by 1900, with entry being witnessed by a large number on the flight deck, and although it had been a long day, our families thought it was well worthwhile. In March, we all took our leave before our final deployment. However, the ship remained as popular as ever, as visits by individuals and groups continued. One such visit was a reunion of about 200 members of the ship's company of the wartime 3rd ARK Royal and their families, and this happened over the weekend of the 18th and 19th of March, and included a tour of the ship and a non-denominational commemorative church service. At long last, Wednesday the 5th of April arrived, and HMS ARK Royal was ready for her final departure from Devonport Dockyard as a commissioned ship. The Wessex SAR flight and the 6 Sea Kings of 824 arrived during the forenoon, and at 16:45 the ship slipped and proceeded to the English Channel in the dry but quiet windy conditions. HMS Fearless made the following signal as we left. "Farewell, big sister, you will be sorely missed. Very best wishes for your final deployment." The 4 gannets of 849B flight were embarked that evening, and after a night of cruising off the Cornish coast, the heavies of 809 and 892 were all safely recovered on the 6th. By 1800 that evening, the ships in company, HMS Devonshire, RFA's Olmeda and Resource, had all joined us off the Scilly Isles, and we set off towards the Azores. As we tracked southwest, it became warmer, and each department used these first days at sea to perform various exercises and evolutions, either on board or with other ships. It was a case of testing equipment and familiarising new people with their jobs. The flight deck was a popular place as keep fit activities got underway, and the flight deck sports became regular sights whenever Sea King flying permitted. By the afternoon of Monday the 10th, the Azores were behind us, and we intercepted an SOS call from a Liberian-registered tanker. The tanker was 185 miles from our position, and she reported that she was on fire in the engine room and that there were several casualties requiring immediate medical assistance. As departments prepared for a similar sort of operation to that carried out during the sea inspection in March, 824 Squadron once more showed how useful it can be. 2 Sea Kings with a medical team, Surgeon Lieutenant Commander Baldock and LMA Basson, were soon on their way to the stricken tanker. By the time the helicopters reached the ship, the Greek crew had brought the fire under control and repair work was in hand, but 3 casualties with burns were returned to ARK Royal for further medical care. When it was obvious that all was well with the tanker, ARK Royal continued its passage across the Atlantic, and after this incident, the remainder of the passage was quiet. The ship's company went into tropical rig on the 12th of April, and arms and legs soon began to change colour, but for some, who decided to do it too hastily, sunburn proved to be very painful. The exercises and evolutions continued, and every now and again the clocks went back 1 hour as we went into different time zones. Saturday the 15th, in fact, was a Sunday routine day, which gave many the opportunity to relax and soak up the sun in temperatures of 30 degrees, while the more energetic took part in the Super Mess competition on the flight deck, which was won by 4 November 2 Mess. That evening, festivities continued with the first band, concert and sods opera of the deployment, and a wide variety of acts kept us entertained for nearly 3 hours. On Sunday afternoon, some of the fixed-wing squadrons disembarked to Roosevelt Roads so that they could fly while we were alongside, and all ships in company berthed at Roosevelt Roads during the forenoon of the 17th, at the start of our visit to Puerto Rico. Whenever ARK Royal visits a foreign port, there are always the usual formal activities, but for most of us there's always time for rest and relaxation in forms which are catered to our individual wishes. At the naval base at Roosevelt Roads, all the facilities were available to us, and the majority of the ship's company took advantage of those without ever leaving the base. For those who ventured a little further, San Juan and the El Yungu rainforest proved to be very popular and interesting. All too soon our visit was over, and during the forenoon of Thursday the 20th of April, we bade farewell to Roosevelt Roads, and off we went to start our work up in the Puerto Rican waters. On departing Roosevelt Roads, the first days were spent to the south of Puerto Rico to recover the fixed-wing aircraft which had been ashore during our brief visit. There was also an opportunity for the other aircrew to get some flying time in, and for other departments to carry out evolutions, checks, repairs or maintenance. On the night of the 21st and 22nd of April, the ship passed through the Virgin Passage to take up station in the exercise area to the north of the islands. Here, we were to remain throughout this work-up phase while we made full use of the American Atlantic Fleet weapon ranges in the area. One of the primary reasons for being in this part of the world was to use the range facilities and enable the aircrew to practice using live heavy weapons and missiles. Each squadron did its own thing during this period with the help of many of the ship's departments. 892 Squadron completed its series of missile firings using the Sparrow and Sidewinder air-to-air missiles against pilotless target aircraft or Lepus flares. So that as many as possible could witness the skill of the squadron, several Sidewinders were fired close in at Lepus flares, resulting in spectacular firework displays. 809 Squadron concentrated its efforts on the island of Vieques. At the eastern end of the island is the controlled bombing range, and the squadron left its mark with 1,000-pound bombs, 2-inch rocket projectiles, Lepus flares, and various other pieces of hardware. Meanwhile, 849B Flight continued their training by working closely with Prang, the Puerto Rican Air National Guard. The Prang aircraft were frequent visitors in the ship's airspace under the control of the Gannets. Not to be outdone, 824 Squadron carried out its own anti-submarine weapon training program. This was done at one of the most sophisticated underwater tracking ranges in the world, just off the island of St. Croix. It also conducted a weapons program to the southwest of Roosevelt Roads. To support all this activity by the squadrons, the weapons supply party, air ordnance teams and the guided weapons section were kept very busy, and extra people were required to ensure that the weapons were ready when required. Interwoven with the weapons program were 2 quality assurance air tests. The purpose of the test was to monitor the 1,000-pound bombings by 809 and the Sidewinder missile firings by 892 to see if any improvements in weapon reliability and increased effectiveness could be achieved. Meanwhile, some of the aircrew were taking part in beach survival exercises on another part of Vieques under the supervision of the Army in the guise of the Carrier-Borne Ground Liaison Section. Although some of them tended to cheat by taking provisions with them, others took it more seriously and endeavoured by various means at their disposal to survive on coconuts, fish and water from solar stills. While all this was taking place, the ship too was very active, preparing herself for the visit of FOCAS, Rear Admiral Staveley. The ship was painted, cleaned and generally smartened up by all departments, and a lot of effort was put in by the ship's company. FOCAS arrived during the afternoon of Saturday the 29th of April, before all the paint had had time to dry. Admiral's divisions took place on the flight deck during the forenoon of Sunday the 30th, while the ship steamed within sight of the North Puerto Rican coast. Those on divisions looked very smart in their best white tropical uniforms, and FOCAS was very pleased with the bearing and appearance of ARK Royals at divisions. To complete the more serious aspect of his visit, FOCAS rounds took place on Monday the 1st of May, and he was most impressed by the consistently high standard that was achieved, both on and off the rounds route, and he remarked that it could only have been achieved by much hard work over and above the effort required to meet the AFWR tasks. "Don't we know it," came the reply, and at least our Admiral was satisfied and recognised that fact. For the remainder of his stay, Admiral Staveley tried to meet as many of us as possible. He flew in all 5 types of aircraft on board, drove the flight deck tractors, toured many departments of the ship, and generally enjoyed himself. He also took the opportunity to visit other ships in the company, and by the time he left us on Monday the 8th of May, there was very little that he had not seen or done in the ship. ARK Royal usually provides the ships in the company with something to look at, but it made a change when HMS Devonshire provided us with a brief period of entertainment when she fired one of her Sea Slug missiles on Monday the 8th of May. During the day, the ship began to prepare for our next port of call to St Thomas in the US Virgin Islands. After a fairly hectic work-up phase, most of us were ready for a period of rest and relaxation, and our arrival off the town of Charlotte Amalie on Tuesday the 9th was greeted with sighs of relief. As the ship was to be at anchor throughout the visit, not as much leave as one would have liked was possible, but most of us made the most of what time ashore we did get. ARK Royal anchored off Charlotte Amalie, the main town of St Thomas, on Tuesday the 9th of May. Once again we were subjected to the boat's routine whenever we wanted to go ashore, but at least it was a little more pleasant on this occasion. As usual, there were the official receptions, but most of us did our own thing whenever we went ashore. As the Virgin Islands are a free port, the shops of Charlotte Amalie were full of goods at low prices from throughout the world, and many of us bought something during our shopping expeditions. The most popular places during the day were the clean beaches around the island with the cool, refreshing and clear seas. Just to spend a few hours relaxing in the sun was heaven for many. Although there were no organised tours on the island, many visited Coral World on Coki Beach on the northeast coast. There were mixed feelings about the underwater observation tower and its associated attractions. From fascinating to interesting to that's a rip-off. Of all the organised activities, the most popular had to be the 2 days of ship banyans on Magens Bay Beach on the 11th and 12th of May. A shuttle service of open-sided buses took us from the waterfront at the USO to the beach on the north coast. Those of us who went on the banyans agreed that they were good value and an enjoyable time was had by all. The sea was warm and inviting, and the beach so picturesque with the trees forming a backdrop to the overall scene, and they were giving the necessary shade as a protection against the tropical sun. For those that had the time, the neighbouring island of St John was also a popular attraction. St John was a quieter, more beautiful island, and had better beaches than St Thomas, and the inhabitants were just as friendly. The Royal Marine Band of ARK Royal gave 2 performances for the locals of Charlotte Amalie in their Emancipation Park close to the island's legislation building. They were well received, and the locals acknowledged the professionalism of the band, and in fact various types of music could be heard throughout the island, from the steel bands, one of which gave a lunchtime performance at the USO, to the pop music of the nightclubs. As usual in any foreign port, ARK Royal attracts a lot of interest, and St Thomas was no exception. Organised tour of the ships by numerous groups were very popular, and our sports teams put up good displays against local opposition. Despite the popularity of St Thomas with the ARK Royals, our stay had to come to an end, and on the morning of Monday the 15th of May, we peacefully departed from our anchorage. Soon after leaving St Thomas, we rendezvoused with HMS Devonshire and Antelope and the RFA's Lioness, Almeida, Resource and Pearl Leaf, which had either been visiting St Thomas with us or had been to other islands within the Virgin Islands. On completion of a massive RAS, the whole group set off in a northwesterly direction towards the Jacksonville Sea Areas, a distance of some 1,100 miles, and that route took us through the infamous Bermuda Triangle. The highlight of the passage was the flight deck fair on the afternoon of Wednesday the 17th of May. The fair was opened by the duty vicar, the captain, and his lady, rumoured to be the Reverend Batten in drag. The members of 4VO mess appeared on the scene in the guise of the Court of King Neptune, together with his musicians, for the ceremony of initiation for selected members into the Bermuda Triangle Crossing Society. There were numerous stalls, raffles and horse racing, and everyone appeared to enjoy themselves. The afternoon raised £585 for the ship's charities funds, which was a great effort by all concerned. By the afternoon of the 18th of May, we'd arrived in the Jacksonville Sea Areas, and once more the flight deck became a busy airfield. The fixed-wing squadrons encountered problems during the early period with a lack of wind, which, coupled with the ME Department's boiler clean programme, limited the ship's speed, and hence not enough wind over the deck was available for several of the sorties. Since we've been on this side of the Atlantic, we've been warned about the excessive use of fresh water on board, and so it came as no surprise when water rationing was introduced on Sunday the 21st of May for 24 hours until we razzed with RFA Almeida. During the period off Jacksonville, the American fleet conducted their annual exercise to the north, called Solid Shield. The ARK Royal group took part on the 23rd and 24th of May, and in particular, our role was to strike the carrier USS JF Kennedy. The flying was a little more intensive than it had been of late, and the squadron's air and ground crews, as well as the ship's supporting departments, gained valuable operational experience under the first exercise conditions of this deployment. For many on board, the main event of the 24th of May was the grand reopening of 4 Bravo heads after their redecoration by a team from the MTD department, and what a vast improvement this was over the previous decor. Thursday the 25th of May saw a completely different type of flying from the flight deck when hands to kite flying stations was piped to announce the grand kite flying competition. Well over 60 kites were entered, and the winners of the various classes of kites were selected by a strong team, the captain, the commander and the chaplain. When the time of reckoning arrived and the launchings took place on the aft end of the flight deck, some of the kites made graceful ascents, while others found the sea a watery grave. However, everyone agreed it was a successful and entertaining competition. While this leisurely sport was taking place, a completely different event took place on the remainder of the flight deck, the Intermess Sports Competition, and 21 teams took part in the 8-event competition, with 6 Ecomess eventually taking the honours. On Saturday the 27th of May, the Air World gave a shop window display, in which the squadrons gave a firepower demonstration and mini-air display. The entertainment included live rocketing and bombing, in-flight refuelling, ASW attacks and formation flying, solo aerobatics, and those of us who witnessed this display in fine flying conditions were most impressed. By now, most people's thoughts were on our next port of call, which was to be Fort Lauderdale, and on completion of flying on the 29th, we left our exercise area and headed south. By the following morning, the flat, straight coastline to the north of Fort Lauderdale was clearly visible with blocks of flats breaking on the horizon. Our entry into Port Everglades during the late afternoon of the 30th seemed very quiet, with few people there to greet us. After all the stories that had spread around the ship that this would be the best run ashore of the deployment, were we in for a big disappointment? Were you disappointed with the 2-week visit to Fort Lauderdale? It is a difficult period to record, as there was so much happening, both official and unofficial, and with the ship's company of 2,700 or more people, not everyone's interests in the visit can be mentioned. In general, most of us found it a very enjoyable visit, particularly for those of us that managed to find a good grippo. For some, it was the start of RA again, as a few families flew out while we were there. As usual, there were the official receptions on board and ashore, and the influence of the Navy League was apparent at these functions. The big disadvantage of our berth in the Port Everglades was that we were as far away as we could have been from the main gate, and transportation, or lack of it, was the main factor to influence people's activities. The 2 tours, organised by Detours, met with poor response, although the day visit to the Everglades National Park was more popular than the afternoon tour of a Seminole Indian village. One of the disadvantages of the tours were the after effects of the mosquito bites. The sick bay was busy with people looking for something to stop them scratching and itching. Without doubt, the best way of seeing the southern part of Florida was to hire a car, and a number of us managed visits to Key West, the Gulf of Mexico coast, and even up to Disney World. For many, however, the car was a means of getting away from the Fort Lauderdale area to any of the towns and beaches between West Palm Beach in the north and Miami Beach in the south. Most of us spent some time on the various beaches, and the majority of us turned a darker shade of brown under the intense heat of the sun's rays. The beach near the Coast Guard station was popular with those who didn't want to venture too far, and their thanks must go to the duty boats crew that took them across the intracoastal waterway each afternoon. Fort Lauderdale offered many places of interest beside the beaches and the bars. Popular attractions were the Ocean World Porpoise shows, the Jungle Queen and Paddle Wheel Queen cruises around the inland waterways, the Voyager sightseeing train tour of the city, and the many parks and open spaces. The nightlife was nightlife, judging by the vast numbers returning to the ship in the small wee hours of the morning, but in general most survived their run ashore. The hotels, nightclubs, discotheques and bars and restaurants and other establishments of entertainment catered for everyone's taste and were well patronised by every member of ARK Royal. On the sporting scene, there was much activity, despite limited sporting facilities being offered to the ship. Besides the interdepartmental fixtures, there were numerous games against local opposition, with rugby, soccer, boxing and golf being the main competitive games. Squash, badminton and tennis were available at the local players' club, and sailing at the Fort Lauderdale Yacht Club was an opportunity not to be missed by keen helmsmen. The ship ran a very successful course for the Royal Yachting Association Elementary Day Certificate under the watchful eye of Fleet Chief Petty Officer Allen. In general, the sports-minded upheld the good name of ARK Royal and put up a creditable performance both on and off the field. The supporters too were out in force, especially against the local soccer team, the Fort Lauderdale Strikers. Possibly the presence of former England players Gordon Banks and Ian Callaghan and other English League players had something to do with this keen support. The weather during the visit to Lauderdale was hot and sunny, and the few showers that were experienced did not dampen our activities or our spirits. In order to show our appreciation to the locals for their warmth and hospitality, the ship was open to visitors over the weekend of the 3rd and 4th of June. 9,956 people came on board. They were most impressed by the kindness of those on duty, either as guides or on the various stands. On Monday the 13th of June, 5 of the ship's boats, manned by 52 volunteers, left for an expedition up the intracoastal inland waterway. We were to see them again on our arrival at Mayport. As with all our visits, they must finally come to an end, and unfortunately our stay at Fort Lauderdale was over, and during the forenoon of the 13th, final preparations were completed for our departure from Port Everglades at about 1500 that afternoon. Soon after leaving the protection of Port Everglades, we went straight into a RAS with RFA's Olmeda and Lioness as the group tracked north back to the operating areas 70 miles off the coast near Jacksonville. We soon slipped back into the normal sea routine, but unfortunately after a 2-week break, not all of the aircraft found it as easy, and no gannets flew during the first days of flying on Wednesday the 14th. To counter this disappointment, the flight deck recorded the 1,000th fixed-wing aircraft recovery of 1978, and on the following day, the 1,000th fixed-wing launch of the year took place. By the 15th, the first of many problems for the Marine Engineering Department came to a head, and the water crisis, which was to be the topic of conversation during this period at sea, began. The problems were due to the evaporators not working to their full capacity, and the need to conserve water was brought home when water rationing was introduced on several occasions. Despite strenuous efforts, the savings were not enough, and water was razzed from any source as often as possible before the end of this session at sea. On Saturday the 17th, we saw the RFA Fort Grange for the first time. She's the first of a new type of RFA and presently carrying out intensive trials. To assist with the flying trials, 3 Sea Kings were dispatched for a few days to join the one already on board. Sunday the 18th proved to be a very testing day for ARK Royal when she was subjected to a full-power trial. The trial was successful and, despite her age, a fine 29 knots was achieved. During the afternoon, the ship was back to her normal cruising speed, and the energetic amongst us were out in force for a flight deck sports competition. Monday the 19th of June marked the beginning of ARK Royal's 4-day involvement in a composite training exercise, Computex. To most of us on board, it was just like any normal flying period, and it was difficult to appreciate that we were actually in an exercise. Throughout the week, the water situation was critical, and we took part in a 7.5-hour RAS with RFA Lioness, during which over 400 tons of water were transferred. By the afternoon of Thursday the 22nd, all of the fixed-wing aircraft had disembarked to the American Naval air stations of Jacksonville and Cecil Fields so that they could continue flying training while the ship was alongside at Mayport Naval Base. During the late afternoon, Rear Admiral Staveley embarked and flew his flag as FOCAS for the very last time. Before most of us had risen on Friday the 23rd, yet another RAS was underway, but this time it was a vertrep of beer from RFA Resource. This was the 5th successive day in which ARK Royal had taken part in a RAS of one form or another, and on completion of the RAS, the remaining helicopters departed as we headed towards the naval base at Mayport. Our entry into Mayport in Procedure Alpha, along with gun salutes from ourselves and from ashore, assured the locals knew of our arrival for the start of a 7-week contractors-assisted maintenance period. Among the welcoming party were members of the Intracoastal Expedition who arrived at Mayport on the previous day. The 52 members of the ship's company who took part in that 310-mile expedition certainly enjoyed themselves, and it's hard to believe all the stories that have been told about the Intracoastal. Overnight stops were made at Coast Guard stations or in civilian yacht marinas and, despite ants and mosquitoes, most people were able to sleep after a full day in the open. Along the way, they visited Peanut Island, Cape Canaveral, Daytona and St. Augustine. Due to the mechanical faults, the maintainers were kept as busy as they are on board, ensuring that the 5 boats were serviceable for each day's passage, and it was agreed by all that it had certainly been a memorable time and one they are unlikely to forget. The main purpose of the visit to the American naval base at Mayport was to put the ship through a contractor's assisted maintenance period. As we all knew, the Marine Engineering Department had experienced many problems while we had been at sea, and it was hoped to rectify these during the period alongside. The work involved was far more extensive than first envisaged, and the department worked continually around the clock to get it completed in time. The daily visits of a milk tanker with fresh supplies of feed water for the ship reminded us that the work down below was still in progress. Other departments too were busy doing their own maintenance and repair work, and the never-ending tasks of cleaning and painting the ship continued daily. By the end of the camp, the outside appearance of the ship was vastly improved. Our stay in Mayport was dominated by an abundance of American hospitality, plus about 400 family visits from home in the UK, making the period a truly enjoyable and memorable one. Our detours organisation did a magnificent job and was a wealth of information. Those who wanted to get away for the odd day or for some leave managed to do so by themselves or with the help of detours, and members of ARK Royal appeared to have visited almost every part of the United States. The heaviest concentration of sailors could be found in Florida, with Disney World, the Orlando area, Cape Kennedy and Daytona, St. Augustine and even Fort Lauderdale being most popular. It can safely be said that the vast majority of us saw and did things we had never seen or done before, thus extending our own personal experiences. During the stay in Mayport, the ship worked a tropical routine, and this gave everyone the chance for sport and recreation. From an official sporting viewpoint, there was a full and extensive programme which was enjoyed by those who took part. The ship produced teams to represent us in many sports against local opposition, and we enjoyed a varied amount of success. In-house, the majority of competitive sports were contained in the Olympiad competition, and this included the swimming gala, sports day, and the chain of command canoe race on Lake Wonderful. The eventual winner of the 6-week Olympiad was the Seaman Department, with the Air Engineers taking second place. Besides the organised sports, there were also many who took advantage of the excellent facilities on the base, the most popular of which were golf, swimming, tennis, fishing, ten-pin bowling and even darts. Away from the ship, one activity that proved interesting and enjoyable was tubing at the Itchy Tuckney Springs near Lake City. Clearly, the beaches were a constant attraction for sport and relaxation throughout the camp, and the keenness and enthusiasm shown by all was encouraging. Although work, recreation and sporting activities took up a lot of time, there were many other things happening. Some even managed to escape for a week in the ship's boats on what were officially termed expeds, although the definition of an exped was often in doubt. On the other hand, 6 members of the communications department walked 91 miles for charity and collected over £347 for the St Vincent de Paul Society in Leeds, which is a home for underprivileged children. The squadrons continued with their flying programmes throughout this time. The aircraft of 892 and 809 had disembarked to the United States Naval Air Station Cecil Fields, while 849, 824 and SAR had disembarked to Naval Air Station Jacksonville before the entry to Mayport, and the remainder of the squadron's personnel joined them afterwards. Each squadron concentrated on its own particular roles, and even managed a few navigation exercises to other parts of America. As with the ship, a lot of maintenance was carried out, and most people took advantage of leave, sports, and the great American hospitality. As usual, there was a vast amount of entertaining both officially and unofficially in the ship and ashore. The Royal Marine Band were kept very busy with many performances, and they proudly flew the flag, as did our sportsmen and many other members of the ship's company on their travels around the United States. The majority of us were a credit to the ship and to the country. By the time early August arrived, there had been many changes in the ship's company, and the bronzed and smiling faces were being replaced by pale ones. As final farewells were made and the ship prepared for sea, our thoughts were once again on what lay ahead. The squadrons too started to arrive back on board, together with all their equipment from the air stations ashore, and despite all the American hospitality and most people's liking for Florida, our time at Mayport came to an end on Tuesday the 8th of August, and we slipped and proceeded from our berth during the early forenoon and headed out to sea. The major task, once we were out into the Atlantic Ocean, was to recover the fixed-wing aircraft from the naval air stations at Cecil Fields and Jacksonville. As with the humans, not all of the aircraft wanted to leave Florida, and, as the ship headed north, a number were left behind, but they managed to join us later in the week, unlike a handful of the human beings. For the next few days, flying was frustrated by very little wind and by mechanical problems on the flight deck, and in the world of condensers and evaporators too. Again, we were subjected to water rationing as demand far exceeded supply. By the time we reached Norfolk exercise areas, some flying was possible, and the air world took full advantage of this opportunity. On Friday the 11th of August, the new FOCAS, Rear Admiral Herbert, OBE, embarked and flew his flag in HMS ARK Royal for the first time. By Sunday the 13th, it was time for a mini CAG to disembark to the American Naval Air Station Oceana, and a number of Phantoms and Buccaneers went ahead to warn the locals of Norfolk of our arrival. The reason for the mini CAG was so that aircrew of both squadrons could continue their flying programs during the visit to Norfolk, Virginia. After what seemed a few days at sea, which allowed us to find our sea legs again after the long break at Mayport, we were soon heading back to the shelter of land and to the largest naval base in the world at Norfolk. As we approached the main base of the United States Atlantic Fleet on Monday the 14th, there were numerous gun salutes before we finally secured alongside, under the shadow of our host ship, the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, USS Nimitz. The main purpose of the visit to Norfolk was for a final briefing and discussions on the forthcoming major NATO exercise Northern Wedding and the run-in period for Exercise Common Effort. As this only involved a small number of people, the remainder were able to appreciate the great American hospitality, continue diplomacy in the field of sport, and generally have a good last fling on American soil. Detours, with their varied attractions, were once again to the fore, with Washington, D.C. and New York being very popular, and many of us took advantage of those trips if we could be spared, along with historical tours of Williamsburg and Jamestown. Despite the fact that Virginia Beach was 20 miles away, it attracted a lot of attention, especially during the evenings. For the less adventurous and those of us short of money, there were on that vast base many facilities available for sport, recreation, and the PX where many last-minute rabbits were bought. Throughout the week, official receptions took their toll, and the Royal Marine Band was in great demand at these and many other functions. On Saturday the 19th, a very rare event took place. Clear lower deck, when we were assembled in the upper hangar to be addressed by the captain. Rumours were at a peak as to what it was about, and it turned out a few of them were correct. The captain told us what lay ahead during the next few months and quashed all the rumours that were going around the ship. During the visit to Norfolk, all departments were busy ensuring that they were ready for the next period at sea, and by our departure day, Monday the 21st of August, all necessary preparations had been made. ARK Royal was the last of the British warships and the RFAs that had been visiting Norfolk to leave, and as we waited our turn to be escorted from our berth, each one of us was probably thinking of the last few months. The Royal Marine Band on the flight deck competed with the band of the Commander-in-Chief US Atlantic Fleet on the jetty, and one large banner held by the Americans indicated the feelings of some of the US Navy. The sign read, HSL 32 says, "Keep the ARK afloat, the rain may be coming." We finally slipped and proceeded during mid-forenoon with the tune Sailing, drifting in the air to bid our last farewell to America, leaving behind many happy memories. We also knew that we had done our duty as the largest and smartest warship in America, and Rear Admiral Herbert was very pleased with our behaviour. We were back at sea, and this time it was to be for 5 weeks, the longest during this deployment. In addition to FOCAS and his staff, there were several new faces on board, including RAF and US Navy people who were embarked for the forthcoming exercises. During the afternoon of the 21st, Buccaneers and Phantoms were recovered from ashore, and the ship continued with her flying programme for a few days in the Norfolk exercise areas. So as to conserve water, a beard-growing competition was begun on the 22nd, and over 1,200 of us took part as hirsute growths spouted from everywhere. Another novelty to occupy our minds and hands was the ARK Royal Grand Handicraft Competition, and while at sea, many were busy preparing works of art. On Wednesday the 23rd of August, after a day of flying, HMS ARK Royal turned her back on America and headed east to join Exercise Common Effort. This combined British and American exercise had begun a few days earlier as the ships had left Norfolk. The exercise concept was to reinforce US forces in Europe with a fleet of American amphibious ships sailing east across the Atlantic, with a screen of nuclear submarines for protection and with ARK Royal providing the necessary air defence, surface search and probe tactics. 824 Squadron, as usual, provided an anti-submarine screen ahead of the force 24 hours a day. The enemy consisted of UK ships and 2 American nuclear submarines. Unfortunately, the weather plagued the fixed wing, and on the 25th and 26th of August, poor flying conditions existed. The meteorologists on 03 deck were intrigued to witness the birth and development of 2 Atlantic depressions. On Monday the 28th, 824 Squadron assumed the role of ambulance when it transferred a sick American petty officer from the submarine USS Sculpin to our own sickbay. On completion of the Cassavac, ARK Royal in company with the USS Montgomery left the exercise to make a fast passage towards the Azores. The intention was to complete some private flying and hopefully to collect some mail. The 30th and 31st was spent to the north of the Azores, with fixed-wing flying a number of sorties, and 824 Squadron acting in the familiar role of HDS, which included the tricky task of lifting a spare Spey engine for a Phantom. During this period, Phocas also took the opportunity of getting airborne, and he flew one sortie in a Gannet from 849B flight. From the Azores, we made another fast passage to catch up with the other ships that had taken part in common effort, and who were now heading north towards Iceland. The main feature of this passage was the NBCD exercise on Friday the 1st of September, in which a great deal of valuable experience was gained, and the whole ship benefited from the analysis of the various evolutions. At 0400 on the 3rd of September, while in the latitude of Newcastle upon Tyne, we changed from tropical rig back into blue uniforms, and the majority of us were delighted. Is this the furthest north that tropical whites have been worn at sea, many of us wondered. Sunday the 3rd was also our last chance to relax before the next major exercise, which began at noon on Monday the 4th of September. Our start position for the NATO Autumn Exercise Northern Wedding was 61 degrees north and 20 degrees west. Along with the USS Forrestal, we were the only fixed-wing aircraft carriers taking part in the year's biggest NATO maritime exercise. Over 200 surface ships and submarines were assembled in the Norwegian and North Seas for the exercise. The planning behind the Northern Wedding was designed to test and exercise a large number of NATO options. These included marking and counter-marking of hostile ships, the reinforcement of an island commando, anti-submarine warfare and electronic warfare. As usual, the scenario consisted of blue and orange forces, and ARK Royal found herself on the blue side. During the exercise, ARK Royal travelled from the start point to the Hebrides, then east of the Faroes, down to the Shetland Orkney Gap, and back to the north, reaching 64 degrees north, our most northerly position this deployment, before finally returning to the Moray Firth. When the weather was suitable, each squadron performed its own special roles, with the Phantoms of 892 defending the ship from air attack, the Gannets of 849B carrying out surface search and surveillance control or airborne early warning of contacts, and the Buccaneers of 809 probing contacts and striking if necessary. The Sea Kings of 824 flew around the clock searching for submarines and also acted in the familiar role of HDS. Once in the Moray Firth, 809 flew sorties into Norway to give air cover to the assault landing by US, UK and Netherlands amphibious forces near Irland. Besides the orange forces in the water and in the air, the exercise also had its real red spectators to contend with. Russian Bear aircraft were regularly sighted, and a range of ships including modified Kashin-class destroyers, Cresta II-class cruisers and Krivac-class destroyers were in company at many different times. As seems to be the case, the weather played an important role in the ship's activities. If it wasn't fog, low cloud or poor visibility, then it was the swell putting the flight deck out of limits, and all prevented flying at one stage or another. On the 16th and 17th of September, It was the turn of the remnants of Hurricane Flossie to affect us as the storm moved northeasterly through the exercise area. ARK Royal suffered sustained winds of 60 knots with gusts in excess of 70 knots, and the violent storm caused some damage, particularly to the quarterdeck, which was open to the mountainous waves. The exercise finished quietly at midday on the 19th of September when we were in the calmer waters of the Moray Firth. Phocas disembarked during the afternoon with some of his staff, and the rest of us set about preparing for our royal visitor the following day. So it was that on Wednesday the 20th of September, HMS ARK Royal welcomed Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, who came to say farewell to her ship. Her Majesty's been associated with the ARK Royal since she launched the ship in 1950 and has returned to ARK on many occasions. Her Majesty, accompanied by members of her household, arrived on board in a helicopter of the Queen's flight just before 11:30 and spent 4 hours with us. During her visit, Her Majesty met officers and ratings informally, had lunch with the captain and senior officers, watched launch and recovery of some of our aircraft, together with a mini flying display, and toured the operations room and the aircraft direction room. She then went to the upper hangar, where about 1,000 men were assembled, giving many their first glimpse of Her Majesty. The captain presented her with a memento of the occasion and all of the ship, when she was asked to accept on behalf of all of us a silver replica of the ship's bell mounted in its wooden tabernacle. After addressing those present in a short and sincere speech, which brought tears to many an eye, we gave Her Majesty 3 hearty cheers. So came to an end a sad but great occasion, as the after lift took Her Majesty out of our midst to the helicopter waiting on the flight deck. Throughout the visit, we were impressed by her warmth and her interest in everyone and everything, and her visit will be remembered with pride for many years to come. The following is a copy of the signal received by the captain from Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother, the following day. I greatly enjoyed my visit to ARK Royal, and I was thrilled by your excellent and very exciting flying display. I was deeply touched by your charming gift of a little silver replica of the ship's bell with its beautifully constructed tabernacle. It will always remind me of a very happy day spent on board ARK Royal. Elizabeth R. As soon as the royal visit was over, 824 Squadron was soon back in the HDS role, embarking stores, mail and people. Our visitors for the passage to Gibraltar included the chaplain of the fleet, the Venerable Basil O'Farrell, 3 members of Parliament, Mr. Spencer Le Marchant, Mr. Michael Brotherton and Mr. John Stanley, plus Mr. Alan Billiard and his recording team from BBC Records. The passage from the Moray Firth took us via the north of Scotland, the islands of the Hebrides, the west coast of Ireland and down to the Bay of Biscay past the Iberian coast. After a fuel raz with RFA Almeida, while to the southwest of Ireland on Friday the 22nd, we bade a final farewell to our faithful oil well as she left us for a refit in Portsmouth. The highlights of this passage included the Grand Craft Exhibition and Competition, a Sods Opera and flight deck potted sports. The handicraft competition had been initiated by the chaplain soon after leaving Norfolk. The exhibition and judging took place during the afternoon of Saturday the 23rd, and over 60 exhibits were shown. They included paintings and sketches, wood, metal, rope and leatherwork, ceramics and models either from commercial kits or self-inspired design, and even a knitted garment was included. It was obvious that we have a wealth of hidden artistic talent on board, and the exhibition gave a lot of pleasure to many. The highly successful Sods Opera during the evening of the 23rd resulted in the ship's second single record being recorded. After several attempts, the BBC men were satisfied with our rendering of The Last Farewell as the A-side, and Never Walk Alone with Land and Hope and Glory on the B-side. The acts during the evening were very varied, and many had taken a lot of time and effort to perform for our amusement. Sunday the 24th was a very pleasant Sunday at sea, with potted sports occupying the flight deck during the afternoon. Competitors and spectators were out in force, and it was obvious from the start that the PT staff had thought up many arduous and strenuous events for the occasion. The eventual worthy winners were the Seaman Department. we successfully secured alongside the South Mole during the forenoon of Monday the 25th of September to start the week's visit. For almost everyone, Gibraltar was the first step ashore for over 5 weeks. Many of the departments took the opportunity to carry out maintenance work and also repair any damage that had been sustained in the storm during Northern Wedding. By the end of the week, the storm-battered scars had disappeared and the ship looked smart with a new coat of grey. On the rest and recreation side, a number took advantage of a week's leave and spent their time in the tiny peninsula with their families who'd flown out from the UK. A very extensive sports programme was held, with success and failure fairly evenly distributed. The biggest event of the week was the Top of the Rock race during the forenoon of Saturday the 30th of September. A gallant 251 completed the uphill course, and congratulations to Chief Petty Officer Joe Clare, who came in first after a fine run, and to 809 Squadron, who were the overall team champions. Gibraltar offered many attractions, and despite the fact that the visit was a working one, many of us found time to see the various sightseeing points of interest. A goodly number took advantage of the day return tours to the Moroccan town of Tangiers on the north coast of Africa. The Royal Marine Band were once again to the fore, with their services in popular demand. The highlight was a memorable concert given by the band in St Michael's Cave during the evening of the 30th of September. Their truly professional performance in such a unique and picturesque setting must be one of the memories of the week for those lucky enough to be among the packed audience. By Monday the 2nd of October, we were ready for sea again, and with our 450-foot paying off pennant flying, we slipped and proceeded from Gibraltar for the last time. Once the familiar sight of the Rock of Gibraltar was behind us, we headed off towards Sardinia and our part in Exercise Display Determination 1978. This NATO exercise had begun during September, and along with forces from the USA, Italy, Portugal, Greece and Turkey, we joined the other British warships that were already there. The aims of Display Determination were to exercise various plans for the defence of strategically important areas of the Mediterranean in a typical scenario of rising tension between the familiar blue and orange forces. Besides the ships of the participating countries taking an active role, there was much support from the shore-based aircraft and a lot of activity on the European land masses bordering the Mediterranean. When ARK Royal joined the exercise on the 4th of October to the southwest of Sardinia, we found ourselves on the orange side for a change. Throughout the exercise, we moved from one operating area to another, spending time off Sardinia, Sicily and Greece, with the aircraft carrying out their usual roles and tasks. On October the 6th, we welcomed for the day Admiral Baldini of the Italian Navy, plus several NATO VIPs. They came to see how we were faring and were impressed by what they saw. During the early stages, buccaneers made strikes against the Blue Convoy and the American carrier USS Forrestal as they tracked to the north of Corsica. At 1600 on the 8th, we changed sides and took the colour blue, erected darkened ship screens for a few days and headed across the Ionian Sea to be off Greece for 2 days. During this period, we were joined by the USS JF Kennedy, and our buccaneers flew sorties to the Aegean Sea to give air support to the amphibious assault landings that were taking place on the Greek coastal area of Strimonikos. On the 10th of October, Admiral Sir Henry Leach, Commander-in-Chief, Fleet embarked, and he spent 2 days seeing and doing as much as he could in the time available, and at all hours of the day and night. One of his first tasks was to give a hand to help to stir the Christmas pudding, ably assisted by the captain and the youngest sailor on board at the time, Junior Seaman Neil Jackson of the side party. When he left us on the afternoon of the 12th, he wished us good luck on the last lap and beyond it when the team breaks up. ARK Royal's final active role in an exercise took place off the east coast of Sicily, and at 1800 on the 11th of October we bowed out of Display Determination. For the following few days we remained in the same area, which enabled us to continue with some private flying. During this period, the Badgers achieved the 2000th fixed-wing launch of the year, when Squadron Leader Joy and Flight Lieutenant Hewitt were catapulted off the Wastecat in a Buccaneer. By the evening of the 14th, all the aircraft were safely on board, and we all waited for a Sunday at sea on the 15th of October. This was because we'd been promised a scenic route by courtesy of N Tours. The navigator had organised the route to Naples such that it took us through the narrow straits of Messina which separates Sicily from the toe of Italy, and then around the volcanic islands which include Stromboli. Our entry into the Bay of Naples in the early forenoon haze of the 16th was followed by ceremonial gun salutes from the ship and from ashore, and we berthed alongside just before 9 a.m. to begin our visit to Naples. The visit to Naples on the 16th of October was the first of our 4 ports of call during our last few weeks of the deployment. Many of us had enjoyed Naples last year and were looking forward to this year's visit. As before, Detours, in conjunction with the Aloshi brothers, organised a number of sightseeing tours. Although not as popular as last year, the tours to Rome and Capri, Pompeii and the Amalfi Coast were well supported. A large number of the crew arranged their own visits using local forms of transport to get about. It was quite warm during our stay, and although we experienced rain most days, the majority of us were not deterred from going ashore. The bars, cafes, shops and narrow back streets were fascinating places and never seemed to lose their appeal. But were you ripped off? The sporting scene was kept to a minimum after the experience gained from a previous visit. Nevertheless, a fair number of competitive sports were played during the week, and the sports afternoon with the Wrens from Nav South proved very popular, with honours fairly evenly distributed. The official functions were many and varied, and the number of VIP visitors during the week were numerous. The large contingent of British Forces personnel in the Naples area ensured that ARK Royals had an enjoyable time during their last visit to Naples. Before sailing on Saturday the 21st of October, we welcomed Admiral of the Fleet, Sir Michael Pollock, along with Judge Advocate of the Fleet, Mr. Howard, QC. They were to be with us until Athens. As we bade farewell to Naples at 1100, we were in company with our faithful companions, RFAs Lioness, Olwyn and Resource. Each of us had our own personal memories of the area, and by the comments that were made, these were many and varied. Once clear of the harbour, 2 Sea Kings of 824 Squadron flew to RFA Olwyn for an quaint detachment. As the group of ships headed southwards towards the toe of Italy, a large RAS took place during the afternoon, and we all passed through the Straits of Messina during the night of the 21st and 22nd of October. Our operating area for several days was to the east and southeast of Sicily, and during this period the fixed wing flew many sorties, enabling the aircrew to keep in the practice. The Sea Kings left on board returned to their popular role of HDS, ensuring that we receive mail on a regular basis. On Monday the 23rd, Phocas, Rear Admiral Herbert, embarked and flew his flag for the last time in ARK Royal. During this short period at sea, he managed to get airborne in a Phantom and a Buccaneer, and, along with the other visitors, enjoyed his stay. During the night of the 25th, after re-embarking the 2 Sea Kings from Olwyn, the group set off on passage across the Ionian Sea, and by the following morning of the 26th, were off Kalamata in southwest Greece. A number of senior officers of the Hellenic Armed Forces arrived on board during the forenoon courtesy of 824 Squadron, and along with us they witnessed the air display and firepower demonstration given by the air group. As usual, we watched a first-class air show, which included aerobatics and the rocketing and bombing of targets using live ammunition. This performance by the squadrons was the last time that we would see such a memorable display, and, on completion, our visitors must have left ARK Royal with the feeling that the Royal Navy was a force to be reckoned with. Overnight we continued our passage to Athens, and by the mid-forenoon of the 27th of October we were just to the east of Piraeus, to begin a 6-day visit to Athens. Once again we were subjected to a boat's routine, but this did not deter those wanting to go ashore. Many invitations were received by the ship for sightseeing tours and evenings at tavernas, and all this hospitality was gratefully accepted. Detours also arranged worthwhile tours away from Athens, and these too were very popular. Athens was a sightseeing paradise with much to see and do for those interested in ruined and historical buildings, and one of the best ways of seeing them was by foot. The number one on most people's lists was the Acropolis, and few were disappointed with what remains of this well-known landmark. The ruined temples, gateways and theatres were a constant reminder of the former greatness of the city. Another popular, but not as old area was the flea market, where many rabbits were purchased after sessions of bartering. The small shops selling various articles from pottery to rugs and brasswares to antiques were often crowded with ARK Royals, and there must be a few people on board who did not barter for a Greek urn. Athens, the home of the first modern Olympic Games in 1896, provided the ship with a fairly busy sports programme. Besides many inter-park games, there was quite a lot of local opposition, eager to test their skills against the ship's teams in soccer, hockey, golf, basketball, rugby and sailing. The highlight was probably the marathon race on Wednesday the 1st of November over part of the 1896 course. 18 runners from the ship set off from the official Olympic starting line in the village of Marathon, ran halfway towards Athens, turned round and returned to Marathon again. 9 runners successfully completed the 26 miles 385-yard course and, as expected, Chief Petty Officer Joe Clare came in first with a time of 2 hours 48 and 55 seconds. The 18 of them must be commended for their effort, and the run raised £885 for various charities. All runners completed at least half of the course, and 6 of the finishers were from 4RO, Chief Petty Officer's Mess. By the time we were ready to depart, our visitors, including FOCAS, had left, and in their place we welcomed 6 members of the Committee of Lloyds, led by their ex-chairman, Sir Havelock Hudson. Over the years, the committee has presented the ship with many gifts, and this was their final farewell to ARK Royal, with whom they've been associated since the beginning. During the forenoon of the 2nd of November, we weighed anchor and headed south with our trio of RFAs. A fast passage found the group in our now familiar stomping grounds to the east and southeast of Sicily by the following morning. For the next 3 days the air group flew many sorties expending their weaponry and operating against the USS Saratoga and dropping Lepus flares for the benefit of a visiting QAAT team. Before leaving Sicily, our visitors from Lloyds, who had had a very full and active few days, departed for the UK, and we prepared for the ship's next and penultimate port of call in the Mediterranean. HMS ARK Royal's arrival in Malta during the forenoon of Monday the 6th of November was greatly appreciated by many Maltese who follow the ship's programme with enthusiasm. Once more the ship was ceremoniously backed into Calcara Creek and secured between the 2 buoys, indicating that a boat's routine would be the order of the day for going ashore. The general atmosphere of the visit to Malta was quiet and relaxed. Many of us took leave, and over 300 families came from the UK to join us for a holiday in the Maltese Islands. The official receptions and visits by service representatives were greatly outnumbered by the unofficial hospitality offered by the locals and by ourselves. Many of the Maltese people have always had great respect for the Royal Navy, and ARK Royal in particular. Over 4,000 people managed to come on board, and full marks must go to the duty guides who showed them round with patience and understanding. The extent to which they appreciated our effort was illustrated by the many grippos that were received and accepted by the ship and by individuals. As expected, sport played a large part in the ship's programme. 8 teams took part in It's a Knockout against a combined British Forces team at RAF Lucca, and this year the trophy returned to the home team. The longest running spoof came to an end on Tuesday the 7th, when the Malta dog shoot did not take place. The planning and arrangements had begun while the ship was at Athens, and about 20 members of ARK Royal had managed to come through a vigorous and searching selection routine in order to participate in this special event. For their last involvement as the ship's travel agent, Detours organised several shopping and sightseeing tours, and while the tours of Malta and Gozo ensured that some of us managed to see the historical buildings, the cheap local buses were used by many, and there were few places on the island that were not visited by the ARK Royals. Towards the end of the visit, the ship's next group of visitors arrived on board. They included television crews from the BBC and ITN, who were to film as much as they could during the next phase at sea. They were joined by Mr. David Shepherd, the well-known wildlife artist, conservationist and steam engine enthusiast. David came on board to photograph, sketch, and to get a feel of the ARK Royal, as he was going to paint the Ark for the Fleet Air Arm Museum. On Thursday the 16th of November, an era came to an end as Britain's last conventional aircraft carrier slipped and proceeded from Calcara Creek. The warm welcome which we had received and experienced during our visit was confirmed when over 10,000 people lined the various vantage points to say farewell to HMS ARK Royal as we sailed with the paying off pennant streaming behind in the breeze. Soon after leaving the safety of Grand Harbour, the First Sea Lord Admiral Sir Terence Lewin embarked for a short visit. As the ship and her escorts of RFAs Lioness, Olwen and Resource headed towards Sardinia, the last full-scale four-ship RAS of the deployment took place. By the morning of the 17th, we were in our new operating area to the south of Sardinia, where we remained for 2 days. During the forenoon, Admiral Lewin left after a full and comprehensive 24 hours on board, and no doubt he felt some of the nostalgia associated with the ship. The following message was received from the First Sea Lord on his return to the UK. Thank you for an uplifting 24 hours. I've never seen the ARK looking smarter, and for everything from flying operations through to EVAPs to be at such a high pitch at this stage is a tribute to you all. Good luck to each and every one of you for the next few weeks and for the future, whatever it may bring. During the afternoon there was another sad farewell when the faithful Wardroom piano was ceremoniously launched from the bow catapult and buried at sea. Many of us gathered on the flight deck and island to mourn the passing of this friend, and the captain commended it to the waters of the Mediterranean as he lowered the flight deck officer's green flag. Throughout this 2-day period, the air group were quite active, flying final sorties or assisting in a Saturday war with HMS Galatea. 2 Buccaneers and 2 Phantoms launched during the forenoon of the 18th, never to recover on board again as they flew off to St Athan near Cardiff. However, some of the aircrew rejoined us in Palma to help fly off the remaining aircraft. During the day our visitors departed, the television crews had filmed launches, recoveries and many other events throughout the ship. David Shepherd gave 3 presentations while on board and is probably the most interesting civilian visitor we had. Saturday the 18th was the last operational day as far as the air group were concerned, and in the late afternoon the last ever fixed-wing recoveries on board ARK took place. The aircraft to have the honour of being the last to recover was, as usual, the Gannet, and on this occasion it was 044, piloted by Lieutenant Slade with Lieutenant Commander Rotherham and Lieutenant Commander Cass. And so ended an era of naval aviation at sea. Overnight on Sunday the 19th, we were on passage towards the Balearic Islands and to Mallorca in particular. The highlight of the Sunday at sea was the car raffle draw in the evening. Most of us either watched ARK TV or listened to Radio 433 to see if we had won any of the prizes. The captain drew the first 3 prizes, and the winner was P.O. Caterer Ritchie, who decided to take the money instead of the car, while the smaller second car was won by LMEM Barnes. Despite many unhappy faces at not winning a prize, the raffle had been quite successful. As the ship's company settled down for the night, thoughts were probably on what lay ahead at our final port of call in the Mediterranean. As HMS ARK Royal approached Palma, in the holiday island of Mallorca on the 20th of November, our 21-gun national salute was followed by the reply ashore, and by mid-forenoon we found ourselves secured alongside to begin our final visit of the deployment. During the ship's stay in Palma, make and mend routine was worked, giving everyone ample opportunity of going ashore and of taking advantage of the warm and sunny weather. For those who liked organised tours, our new travel agents Rev Tours, with their motto, "It's quicker by Vicar," provided a selection of day tours around the island. However, by far the most popular and most successful were the splendid evenings at the medieval banquet or a Spanish fiesta barbecue. Although the junior ratings were required to wear uniform ashore, they found it a suitable grippo-catching rig, and it was this that led to many to say that Palma was the best run since America. In fact, the attitude of the British locals and holidaymakers seemed to be, get an ARK Royal sailor, and consequently the shops, beaches, cafes, nightclubs and hotels were popular places with ARK Royals. While most of us were ashore, there were many people waiting to visit ARK, and several thousand toured the ship in either organised parties or as guests of the ship's company. Sport was kept to a relatively low key, with golf, soccer and sailing being the main representative sports during the visit. The highlight was the ARK Royal versus the Combined Squadrons football match, which was thinly disguised as a General Service v Fleet Air Arm match, and honours were evenly shared at 2 goals each. As the last rabbits were purchased and the ickies ran out, we were joined by yet another BBC TV team before sailing. Unfortunately, our departure at 10 o'clock on Saturday the 25th was marred by a shower, and so few of us actually witnessed our last farewell to a foreign port of call. The main thoughts once we were at sea was the disembarkation of the fixed-wing aircraft, and RFA Olwyn with 2 Sea Kings of 824 Squadron departed for Gibraltar to collect HM Customs officials. Once more the weather was to play an important part in our lives, as the wind established itself over our proposed disembarkation area, giving high seas and gale-force winds. During the evening, on a cold windy quarterdeck, many of us assembled for a mini-band concert, the real purpose of which was for the TV team to film us singing The Last Farewell, to be used on top of the pops whenever our record was played. At last, Monday the 27th, disembarkation day arrived, and despite the Mistral, with its very rough seas and winds in excess of 40 knots, and a number of aircraft faults, 2 Sea Kings and the remainder of the fixed-wing air group all managed to disembark throughout the day and head home. The final fixed-wing launch took place at 15:11, when Phantom 012, crewed by Flight Lieutenant MacLeod and Lieutenant McCallum, was sent down the waste catapult, and that was it. For the very last time we were here, without our fixed-wing aircraft, but all the final launches had been recorded for posterity by the TV cameras. Although the fixed-wing aircraft had left, there was one final evolution to be completed before we could head for home. This was the back raz of ammunition to RFA Regent, and no sooner had the aircraft gone than ammunition began to appear on the flight deck in readiness for the raz. This took place on the 28th and 29th in cold and windy conditions, and full marks must go to everyone who took part in ensuring that the whole operation was successfully completed on time. RFA Olwyn rejoined us on the 29th, and, when the Sea Kings of 824 Squadron re-embarked, they brought the customs officials with them, who began their long and searching task immediately, and finally finished clearing us while we were off the coast of Cornwall. As ARK Royal approached Gibraltar on the 30th of November, the BBC team disembarked with their films of various events which will be used by different TV programmes, and by the afternoon we'd passed through the Straits and once more were into the Atlantic Ocean. The swell-dominated route home had its highlights, with the final maxi-band concert in the upper hangar starting the ball rolling. This concert was probably one of the best ever, and the Royal Marine Band deserved all the praise and appreciation they received. The band, under Warrant Officer Whittle, had certainly done us proud during the last 8 months. Earlier in the day, it was learnt that the ship's name would live on when it was announced that the 3rd CAH through-deck cruiser would take the name ARK Royal. Although our ARK Royal sees the end of an era, the new ARK Royal will play an important role in the next era of naval aviation. On Sunday the 3rd of December, the ship's company had their Christmas dinner, and during the afternoon while in Mounts Bay, 824 Squadron and the SAR flight completed a shuttle service to Couldero's of men and stores. The SAR flight returned on board and departed from the flight deck for the last time once the ship was safely secured alongside in Devonport. We were told that our commanding officer, Captain Anson, is to be the next Flag Officer Naval Air Command in June 79 and will be confirmed as a Rear Admiral in January 1980. Overnight, ARK remained in the English Channel, and before dawn on Monday the 4th of December we were heading for Plymouth Breakwater, with the knowledge that for once the weather would not prevent us going up harbour. Once inside, the ship's company manned the ship's side for Procedure Alpha, and as dawn broke, the tugs arrived to escort us to our berth. The various vantage points were lined with spectators, and on several occasions we broke with naval tradition, and the order came to wave back to the waving crowds. Many signals were received welcoming us home, and the ships on the dockyard outer walls manned their sides as we passed, followed by an increasing number of tiny ships and tugs. As HMS ARK Royal approached her berth, thousands of wives, children and sweethearts were patiently waiting to be reunited with their menfolk at the end of this deployment. At 0850, the order to ring off was given by Captain Anson, and back came the reply, "Engines rung off for the last time, sir."